Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year's Eve. All right, we're going to get started. Well, that's good. We'll call this our men's group. We've got a full group. So we're going to actually be talking about today kind of the origins, the etiology of where dysfunction comes from, okay? A lot of times we talk about what's normal, what's not normal, what's healthy, what's not healthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then nobody ever gets to where it comes from or why or how it starts. Everybody tells you how bad it is and they can point out where all the dysfunction is, which is self-explanatory or self-evident, but nobody tells you where it comes from. How did it evolve? How did you get it? And what to do about it, okay? So we'll set some standards for how to live a prosperous, good, healthy existence, to be happy in life. Okay, it's one thing to pick out the symptoms of being miserable, which a lot of people are. It's another thing to say, well, where did that come from? How do I fix it? And what do I do? So I'm more interested in the fixing part, okay? Because it's easy to point out bad things, but it's even harder to give the solution. So that's what we're going to do today. All right. So, well, let me ask you the question, and I usually start with my new orientation. Like you guys, where does dysfunction come from?
Family.
You say from family? Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. Sometimes misery.
Well, where does the misery come from?
I don't know.
Because that is dysfunction. Being miserable and having bad behaviors and feeling terrible, we want to know, where does that come from? How do you get it?
Depression.
What's that?
Depression.
Okay, but that's part of the dysfunction.
Well, that's working out.
Depression, anxiety, and misery, where does it come from?
Oh, it gets mixed.
What's that?
I said it, most of the time, it just gets mixed together.
Okay, so you don't know. So now you're theorizing what family? Okay, so where does dysfunction come from? Well, it does have a beginning point. All things have a beginning, middle, and an end. For the most part, when we're talking about dysfunction in particular, it has an origin, and then there's a progression. They call that the etiology or the epidemiology. The etiology is the origin of it, and then the end or the outlook for it is the prognosis. Okay, and then there's the treatment part. The treatment part is, what do we do about it? So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover the beginning, the progression, the intervention, and then the fix or the cure. Okay. So where does it all stem from? Well, it's an overgeneralization to say family, because it can be from other things. I'm going to preface this by saying that when we discuss things in here, I'm doing statements of fact, and I'm not giving opinion. And when we talk about where things come from, we talk in generalities. I can't speak to outliers or extraneous variables. Okay, well, I had an uncle, cousin's nephew's friend who one time did this and nothing bad happened to him. Okay, that's 1 in a million. I probably don't believe you, but if it did occur, wonderful. I'm talking about the other 99%. So when I'm speaking in this, I'm speaking in generalities. Okay, so it's mostly applicable to everybody. I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule. We just don't speak to those in here. Okay? So, that being said, family is very important. Okay? But how can family cause depression? How can family cause insecurity? How can family cause addiction? Where does that come from? See, it's one thing to say family because you remember some of the the lectures, but be specific. Well, your surroundings are important. So environment too. So not just family, which is the immediate and most influential in terms of behavior, but also your environment. What if you're in a dangerous or a bad environment or a impoverished environment? Of course, that's going to affect your happiness, your well-being, and so on. Basically, what it comes down to is children develop. All human beings develop, but especially in childhood, you're very vulnerable because your brain is developing, your body's developing. So that's when you're most influenced. That's when you're developing how to deal and cope with life and how to navigate life and what to do to be successful in life. right? So it would be common sense to think, well, obviously then your caretakers would have the most influence on that, because you're not born with an inclination to cope and deal with life. You have to be taught that, because you're dependent for the first several years of your life, literally for your existence.